My name is Cole Brewer, and this is my senior project for Eternity Bible College. I'm going to be talking about CrossFit today and elucidating the cultural story of CrossFit, as well as how it intersects and deviates from the story of God. So today, the aim is to explain the culture of CrossFit, and then again to highlight how it intersects and then deviates with the gospel. And then I'm going to give some practical points for those that are interested in reaching people of this particular culture and how they can do that. So the way that I'm going to do that is I'm going to give a little bit of history and background to CrossFit. And then I'm also going to highlight what the things that make CrossFit a unique culture. I'm going to talk about their values and the things that they hold dear, the things that they hope for, and the things that they hold in high esteem. Then I'm going to talk about how CrossFit reflects God's own aims and intentions in creation, as well as how CrossFit contradicts them. The way I'm going to do that is I'm going to trace a theme through the Bible and show how CrossFit has resonance with those things and then also deviates from it. And then lastly, I'm going to give some application. So, what is CrossFit? This is a little bit of a slippery term, and the reason that it is because we use it in all these different ways. Do we mean a fitness methodology? Do we mean a franchise business, as in a gym, a place that you go? Is it a sport? And then lastly, some people consider it a cult. But it's an odd word because we go to CrossFit, but we also do CrossFit. We are CrossFitters, but we don't work for CrossFit. So I want to be clear on what I mean during this presentation when I say the term CrossFit. And when I say CrossFit, what I mean is a global community that participates in a specific fitness methodology within smaller localized communities known as boxes or gyms. Okay? This definition helps to highlight the specific methodology known as CrossFit, as well as focusing on the worldwide community, but also it keeps an eye towards the localized communities, the places where CrossFit as the methodology is actualized and lived out in real time. So that's the definition that I'm working with, focusing primarily on where this stuff happens, which is in the local boxes. Okay, time to give some history and background on CrossFit. CrossFit was started by Greg Glassman, who is the founder and CEO. They started it in Santa Cruz, California, and then they launched their website, CrossFit.com, in 2000. From there, CrossFit experienced pretty rapid growth as people were able to access their workouts for free online. And then they started posting their times, comparing, coaching tips were started, and the whole business started to revolve around this website. So, if we're going to talk about the history and background of CrossFit, we need to look at how it relates to the internet and the growth of the internet. So, from 2000 to 2016, people within the United States, their access to internet doubled. In 2000, 42% of people had access or were utilizing the internet in their households. By 2016, 88% of people had adopted the internet in their home. So this means during the same time period that CrossFit experiences its most explosive growth is the same time period that the internet doubles in people's utilization of it. But not only that, but during the same period of time, from 2000 to 2016, the number of broadband subscriptions per 100 people went from 2.51 in 2000 to 33 prescriptions per 100 people in 2016. This means that from 2000 to 2016, people's access to high-speed internet went up by 15 times. What this means is that people's access to internet doubled, but then their demand for high-speed internet and their utilization of the internet increased by a 15-fold. So people are using the internet more, and they have more access, and they are utilizing it more in their day-to-day life. The demand for high-speed internet is increasing. Around this time, CrossFit's business model starts to really revolve around its around its website. Then in 2002, they launched their first affiliate in Seattle, Washington. In 2018, they went from one affiliate in 2002 to 15,500 globally in 2018. So the growth of CrossFit roughly coincides with the growth of the internet through this same period of time. Not only did CrossFit blow up during this explosive time for the growth of the internet, but it also coincided with falling numbers of church attendance, as well as rising numbers of religious non-affiliation. So, during this rough same period of time, from 2007 to 2018, the number of religious nons or non-affiliated grew from 16% to 26% in an 11-year time span. Not only that, but people's attendance at church had a huge drop-off from 2009 until 2020, where it's been cut in about half in that same amount of time. So what this means is that people are affiliating with traditional religious structures less, and they are attending those religious structures less often. And so church attendance is falling and religious non-affiliation is increasing. So while people are attending church less and their religious affiliation is decreasing, they are still finding that sense of community, belonging, and purpose in auxiliary structures. And others have recognized this. Andy Thurston and Casper ter Kuile, they were graduates from Harvard Divinity School, and they work for Sacred Design Laboratory, and in their, which is a research and consultancy lab, they did a 2-year study on auxiliary structures where people are finding the same purpose and the same community that they once found in those traditional structures. And they found that CrossFit was one of the major structures or one of the major institutions where people were going instead of church. As well, Cody Musselman, a 4th-year doctoral student in American religious history at Yale University, is doing her PhD dissertation on CrossFit and how it functions essentially as a religion for people. So people are not attending church as much, but they're finding those same kinds of community and things in auxiliary institutions like CrossFit. And this is what I found in my own research. Was I sent out a survey and encouraged CrossFitters to send it out to those within their network, those that likewise did CrossFit, and I got over 311 responses. I found that 257 people out of those 311 say they go to CrossFit 4 times or more per week. This stands in marked contrast to the falling number of just weekly attendance at church. This research would show that once a week attendance at churches is declining, but meanwhile CrossFitters are attending their gyms at a much more regular rate. They're darkening the doors of their gyms 4 times or more per week, while people are darkening the doors of churches less and less and less. So the fallback of this is that there's a potential that the type of person that is going to fill out a survey for CrossFit is already going to be the type of person that is already dedicated and passionate about CrossFit. So that might skew the results here. But I still think that it's illuminating to see how often people are attending CrossFit. In addition, I asked explicitly if being a part of a CrossFit gym was more important to these people than being part of a traditional religious structure. And what I found was that 55% of people said that they either agree or strongly agree that, they would rather be a part of a CrossFit gym, or being a part of a CrossFit gym is more important to them than being a part of a religious structure. And 21% of people were neutral. And when given a scenario where I ask people the importance of finding certain structures and institutions in that if they were to move towns, 38% of people said that finding a religious community like a church was not at all important to them. But meanwhile, 53% of people said that finding a CrossFit gym was very important to them. So some people are saying that finding a church is not at all important to them, but the majority of people are saying that finding a CrossFit gym is extremely important to them. This data seems to agree with the contentions of Sacred Design Laboratory that people are moving away from traditional religious structures and moving into auxiliary structures that fulfill those same the same functions as those traditional structures. So, CrossFit as culture. What stands out about CrossFit and what makes it unique? What are the values that are tied up in the culture of CrossFit? When you walk into a box, what are you going to experience? And this is what I found. CrossFitters and the culture of CrossFit holds competition, progress, performance, community, and health in high esteem. These are huge values for them. So in regards to competition, CrossFit classes are ordered around the whiteboard where there is a workout written, times and performance is recorded, and all of this is oriented around the idea of competition. I'm trying to beat the guy next to me that I pushes me to be better. The whole order of CrossFit classes is generally ordered around the dynamic of competition. And we see this, for instance, CrossFit wholeheartedly embraces this. In their level 1 training guide, they say, quote, "We have learned that harnessing the natural camaraderie, competition, and fun of sport or game yields an intensity that cannot be matched by other means," end quote. So CrossFit fully endorses and embraces the competitive spirit, and they actually promote it. With over 400,000 people competing in the 2018 CrossFit Games Open, this makes it, this competition, the world's largest participatory sporting event. So not only is it that competition is highly valued, but performance is highly valued as well. In the same survey that I conducted, 202 people out of the 311 responses that I got said that the performance benefits of CrossFit is what has continued or what has kept them involved in CrossFit. They see the performance benefits, they are making progress in their performance, and the people that I asked said that that is what has kept them in CrossFit. So people have a high value for improvement. That's why we measure scores and we measure weights, is so that we can map somebody's progress in their performance and people have a tangible and real and practical example of their improvement. And people live off that. They highly value seeing their progress throughout time. And then finally, CrossFit in general is aimed at improving people's health. This is conveyed explicitly throughout the coach's level 1 seminar, and the handbook states that chronic disease like obesity, coronary heart disease, type 2 diabetes, stroke, Alzheimer's, etc. is, quote, "the greatest problem facing the world today," end quote, and that CrossFit, quote, "can give you a pass on chronic disease," end quote. CrossFit sees chronic disease as being the world's leading and foremost problem in the world today. And they see CrossFit as a methodology and what's happening in the boxes throughout the world as the answer to this problem. So they have a goal, they have a mission to tackle chronic disease throughout the world, and they are adamantly going after that. So this brings us to the health benefits of CrossFit, or the value of health within the CrossFit community. CrossFit emphasizes the health benefits of their methodology and what's happening in their boxes, and they maintain that it's not only the physical health benefits that are happening within their boxes, but they maintain that they are benefiting people's mental and emotional and social health as well. So, for instance, the corporation claims, quote, "We have observed that nearly every measurable value of health can be placed on a continuum that ranges from sickness to wellness to fitness. Though tough to measure, we would even add mental health to this observation. Depression is clearly mitigated by proper diet and exercise," end quote, from the Level 1 training guide. So what this means is that CrossFit is claiming that they are adding benefit to people's health in all areas of life. And I would say that they even lean into the spiritual benefits of their methodology. In an interview with Sacred Lab Design, Greg Glassman said, quote, "Let me tell you something about these people," referring to coaches. "They are having an impact on their membership that very few professionals will ever have. It is profound, and we impact every aspect of our clients' being, every aspect. Physical, psychological, social, emotional, spiritual, it's all impacted, and all impacted favorably in a way that your psychiatrist, your physician, your dentist, your doctor, your lawyer, your clergy are unlikely to match. So I know what it's like to unlock those doors and have that impact on people," end quote, from the CrossFit as Church interview with Harvard Divinity School. So, CrossFit claims that they can have a positive impact on every aspect of people's life, and this is largely reflected in their experience. From the survey that I conducted, people largely admit that CrossFit has a positive impact on their emotional, mental, and social health. They overwhelmingly reported a positive impact on these areas, and no one reported a negative impact on their mental, emotional, or social health due to CrossFit. In addition, CrossFit has a huge and unique emphasis on their community. If you're going to talk about everyone that acknowledges CrossFit as a unique culture looks to the community as one of those things that stands out. From this graphic, from the survey that I conducted, the majority of people consider their CrossFit community to be their closest community. In interviews that I conducted with CrossFit coaches from Montana, California, and Oregon, with a combined total of over 55 years of experience, all of them noted the community of CrossFit as a huge value within CrossFit as a culture. And this is due to a couple of reasons. Those same people that I interviewed, most of them noted how it's the shared experience of suffering through the workout that brings people together. They experience opposition in the form of a workout. They sweat and bleed and break down together, and that builds the bond closer together. Additionally, the competitive atmosphere that is a part of the dynamic of CrossFit drives people in overcoming opposition together, and then that drives them closer together. So the competitive spirit, as well as the inherent nature of the workouts themselves, all serves to build the community. In addition, it's also formed in the crucible of opposition. I already noted the opposition that people experience within the workout themselves, but they also experience opposition in the form of external opposition. When asked if people had experienced external opposition in the form of people expressing their concern about, quote, the dangers of CrossFit, most people reported that people had approached them about and expressed their concern to them about the dangers of CrossFit. So when people experience this form of external opposition, they find support and solidarity from those from among their number. Those that have those same shared experiences in their boxes are the ones that are supporting them. So as they're experiencing external opposition from people, people within CrossFit are experiencing support from their boxes, which continues to grow the community closer. And so this is what bolsters the feeling of belonging and a sense of purpose within the people's community. And then finally, in a survey that I conducted, I asked people which of the 4 categories were what initially drew people to CrossFit. These range from the aesthetic benefits to the health benefits to the performance benefits in sport and those kinds of things, and then lastly, the community. And as you can see, none of these categories stand out notably, other than aesthetics. But when I asked what are the reasons that have kept people in CrossFit, why have they continued in CrossFit, it's interesting that every other reason took a notable jump, and the reasons for people staying in CrossFit moved away from aesthetics and toward the health, community, and performance benefits. However, the most notable jump in this graphic is with the community. This means that people are jumping into CrossFit for a variety of reasons, and most of them are jumping in, it seems like, for the aesthetic benefits, but what's keeping them in CrossFit is the community that they experience when they walk through the doors. This just serves to highlight how important and valuable community becomes to people that enter into their boxes. They're entering into their boxes without a huge value for the community, but what has kept them enduring through CrossFit has been the community that they experience. So while it may not be a value when they initially come, it soon becomes a value that keeps them enduring through CrossFit. Now, I think it's important to highlight a little bit more of the religious aspects of CrossFit. CrossFit is often referred to in jest as a cult, and some people have been wary of CrossFit for its cult-like character. And this is not necessarily unwarranted. For instance, Cody Musselman, the fourth-year doctorate student at Yale University, says in a journal article, quote, "During fieldwork at CrossFit competitions and in CrossFit gyms across the country, my interlocutors frequently described CrossFit as religious by enumerating the ways CrossFit was analogous to evangelical Christianity. They provided examples such as testifying to others after experiencing the life-changing impact of the CrossFit method, or frequently returning to and quoting from memory Glassman's foundational CrossFit journal articles that are now part of the Level 1 Instructor Guide." So, a trained observer in the religious elements within culture notes the religious-like character of CrossFit and reckons it to evangelical Christianity, noting that people are even memorizing passages from the Level 1 training guide and stating them from memory. So there's a lot of resonance with religious-like elements within CrossFit. For instance, in the survey that I conducted, 78% of people said that they agree or strongly agree that their time at the gym is their most sacred time of day. This means that people are regarding their time at CrossFit as sacred. So 4 times or more per week, the majority of people are going into their CrossFit gyms, and they consider that time sacred. They're guarding it. In addition, people are very willing to share about CrossFit. On a scale of 1 to 5, with 1 being not true at all and 5 being very true, the overwhelming majority of people said that they are very likely to share about CrossFit and try to get other people to join. And then when I asked how many people have invited others to come to their CrossFit gym, the majority of people have invited 5 or more people to come to CrossFit with me. In my anecdotal experience as a lifelong Christian that's been located in different churches, this stands out to me in that people are, 1, willing to share and try to get people, but they're also willing to invite people to their gym. To me, this stands out as different in a lot of ways from people's willingness to invite others to come to church with them. And it just stood out to me as how willing people are to share and also personally invite others to come with them to CrossFit. And then finally, I ask people whether or not their CrossFit community has helped to add purpose to their life. And 83% of people said they agree or strongly agree that their CrossFit community has helped to add purpose to their life. This seems to align with what Greg Glassman and CrossFit seems to be claiming, is that people are finding purpose, they are buying into the mission of CrossFit in battling chronic disease, and they are finding a sense of belonging and added purpose to their life because of their CrossFit community. The religious like elements are very pronounced in this sense. So now, God's story and CrossFit. How do they intersect and how do they deviate? What are the resonances with the gospel that we find in the Bible? So the theme that I've observed throughout the Bible has been community, conquest, and health. It seems that the Bible consistently demonstrates God's disposition in offering healing, especially to those within his covenant community, as he overcomes those that oppose him and his people. This means that in the contest between the powers of evil and the powers of God, God overcomes them. That's the story that we see from the beginning to the end of the Bible. And not only that, but he delivers his covenant people in the midst of all of that. And through that, they experience the blessings of being within his presence, of which come in the way of healing and life abundantly. So for instance, in Genesis 1-3, God overcomes the powers of chaos, and then he delivers his image bearers onto his cosmic mountain of the Garden of Eden, which is meant to symbolize the sacred space of his dwelling. He walks in the garden with them, and they experience life and life abundantly within God's presence, as they experience the divine blessings of being within God's sacred space. But of course, they screw it up and they are exiled and cast out from the garden, where they experience the curse of death and corruption, which we see in the spiral that happens from Genesis 3 to Genesis 11, as death seems to pervade more and more deeply into every avenue of culture and life, as the corruption of sin seems to get a firmer and firmer grasp on creation. But then in Genesis 12, we see God restoring blessing back to the world as he makes a covenant with Abraham and says that I'm going to bless you and all the nations through your offspring. And so the divine initiative to restore blessing back to creation kicks off with Abraham and then the people of Israel. And then we see God again delivering his people through the powers, through the sea, and from their enemies, through their enemies, which are Egypt. And then just after this, God says to them, if you will diligently listen to the voice of the Lord your God and do that which is right in his eyes and give ear to his commandments and keep all his statutes, I will put none of the diseases on you that I put on the Egyptians, for I am the Lord your healer. So Israel is destined to be the location of God's divine dwelling place again, and they are meant to experience the blessings that come as being a part of being within God's presence. And he promises to protect them and keep the diseases that he once put on Egypt, and he's going to keep them from those diseases. So within the community of Israel, there's security in the community, there's deliverance from enemies, and then there's health as a benefit of being within God's presence. So we see this again in Leviticus that outlines how people are to exist within God's sacred space. And not only that, but the sacred space of Israel, it assumes God's healing power. So for instance, in chapter 14, it assumes that God is going to heal lepers. it gives provisions for priests when God heals people. And then in chapter 6, it outlines the benefits of God's blessings, which includes protection from enemies and disease, while promising defeat by enemies and plagues if they transgress the covenant. So, covenant blessings for obedience, and then covenant curses in the case of disobedience. But the manifestations of those things is protection from enemies in the case of obedience, and protection from a disease. But then the manifestation of curse comes in the way of plague or disease, and then also defeat by enemies. So the covenant promises include communal security, health, and flourishing as a consequence of being within God's presence. But God's curse will mean the removal of God's presence, and which will open up Israel to being vulnerable to dispersion, by dispersion by enemies, and to disease. Again, this is reflected in Deuteronomy 7:14, as we see that God will take away from his people who experience the blessing of being within his presence. He's going to take away from them all sickness. The health benefits of being in God's presence are manifold. He's going to protect his people from all those that hate them by manifesting the curse on the enemies of God and his people. But of course, Israel fails, and they don't properly honor God, and they don't properly keep the covenant, which means that they are exiled. They are subject to all the covenant curses that was promised in the Pentateuch. And so they experience exile, they experience the covenant curses, but God faithfully returns his people back to the promised land, but they are still subject to foreign powers. And they look forward to an exile, the return of God to Israel, and the ultimate redemption from their exile. And this is anticipated in places like Malachi 4:2, which says that that healing will be in the wings of his chosen one. The Messiah is coming, and there will be healing in his wings. And then in the Septuagint, it says that the Spirit of the Lord will be upon the Messiah, and he is anointed, and he is going to bring the good news, which will heal the broken in heart, and he will proclaim liberty to captives and recovery of sight to the blind. So the Messiah is coming, and he's going to liberate people from their enemies, and then he is also going to bring healing to everyone. And so Jesus' kingdom proclamation means the restoration. He comes, and Jesus claims that he is the one that is bringing the ultimate return from exile, and that he is the one that is enacting God's kingdom here on earth. And so people are going to experience healing, which is explicitly referenced in places like in Mark 6:56, as well as Matthew 9:35, and in Matthew, he connects directly the kingdom proclamation with the healings that Jesus is performing. And so Jesus claims that he is the one that is bringing back God's presence to Israel, and he is restoring God's kingdom on earth. And the manifestation of that comes by way of his healings. And he demonstrates that God is returning through the healing that he brings to Israel. But not only that, he doesn't only just heal Israel, but he opens up the doors to those that are outside of the covenant community. And so he heals the Syrophoenician woman's daughter. He heals the centurion's servant. Jesus' posture towards those that are outside of the covenant community is just as open and welcoming as to those within the covenant community. And so Jesus extends the blessings of being within the divine presence to not only Israel, but he opens the door to those that are outside of ethnic Israel. And Jesus becomes the location of God's divine presence as he starts to cast out the manifestations of the curse and those that are the enemy, those that symbolize the enemy. And then his death and resurrection inaugurates the new creation as he finally defeats those that oppose all things good in his creation. And so, John specifically references this in his story of the resurrection, in which he means to highlight that this resurrection means new creation, the beginning of new life in his world. And so he highlights that Jesus is raised on the first day. Just as God created the creation on the first day, Jesus inaugurates the new creation on the first day. And not only that, but Mary Magdalene, when she runs into Jesus, she supposes him to be the gardener, in resonance again with Adam in the Garden of Eden. So John is pointing us to the direction of new creation and the new image bearer, which is Jesus, who is bringing back who is ultimately restoring creation and bringing God's blessing back to the world. And then the church is meant to enact this blessing, and we see this all throughout Acts, and then it's imagined in Revelation as people are risen from the dead, in resonance with Jesus' own ministry of raising people from the dead. People are healed throughout Acts as the church goes out and spreads beyond Jerusalem and to all ends of the earth. People are bringing what once used to be specifically located only within Israel, and they're extending that blessing of God's presence wherever the church exists. And so whoever is spirit-filled becomes the new place where God's presence dwells, and all of those, and it's casting out the curse as they move forward. And then the enemies are defeated ultimately through the community's suffering. So in Revelation 2-3, there's this constant call for the church to conquer, and the way that they do that is imagined throughout Revelation is by being conquered. And so there's the element of resonating with Jesus's own suffering actually brings about the restoration of the world. So CrossFit mimics this in many ways by asserting that through the sufferings of those that are within their boxes, the sufferings of the CrossFit community in the form of the workouts and nutrition, they are working to defeat the enemies that are promoting chronic disease in the world. So CrossFit mimics this same idea of having a covenant body dedicated to a methodology which is spreading throughout the world in order to defeat an enemy and conquer an enemy, and they do this by way of their suffering. And so it mimics this, but the problem is that they do not give proper acknowledgement to God. And then what we see envisioned throughout the Bible is the ultimate defeat of the final enemy, which is death and corruption. So corruption is ended and witnessed, and this is witnessed in places like Romans 8:18-25, which talks about the creation groaning for the revealing of the sons of God so that it can be no longer subject to the corruption that has come through the fall of Genesis 3. Likewise, in 1 Corinthians 15, it envisages God's kingdom coming and him restoring all until we finally see God face to face and God becomes all in all. Death and pain are no more as the enemies are finally defeated, and people no longer fear dispersion or disease. And this is finally witnessed in a place in Revelation 21:4, which talks about God wiping away every tear from the eyes of those that experience his blessing, and as they come to dwell forever in his new Jerusalem, the place where there is no temple because God's presence is all and in all. And the former things have passed away and pain is no more. So, I already brought up points where it seems like CrossFit mimics the story of God of having a community of people that are aimed towards defeating an enemy, and they do this by way of their suffering. But CrossFit also has significant departures from the gospel. So for instance, CrossFit locates healing within their methodology and sets itself up as the good news for healing and well-being. It gives no acknowledgement to God, and it gives no acknowledgement to the King, which is Jesus. CrossFit also can become an idol. I've seen this in my own experience as people order their entire lives around CrossFit, and it becomes an obsession that supersedes all other devotions. The paywall to CrossFit becomes the means to blessing, which contradicts the free grace of Jesus, which is offered to all. In an article titled "The Socio-Demographic Patterns of Chronic Disease" in the American Journal of Preventive Medicine, has found that in America, quote, individuals with lower income and education had higher rates of chronic disease and unhealthy behaviors than those with higher income and education, end quote. Therefore, the very people that are most at risk and are most in need of what CrossFit has to offer are the very people that are most likely not being treated because of the expense of CrossFit. CrossFit is wildly expensive to most people that are experiencing chronic, or to a lot of people that are experiencing chronic disease, and there's no way to get around the paywall because CrossFit is, after all, a for-profit business. And so, in the end, CrossFit values profits over people. This directly contradicts the suffering witness of the church on the benefit of those that could not do for themselves the healing that they need. So, finally, how do we reach CrossFitters? My first point is that I think that we need to go to where they are. We can either join a gym, we can start a gym, which is what my church has done, and I'm very proud of the fact that we have made an effort to go to where CrossFitters are. Another thing is that we can become proficient at CrossFit. This may sound like the most bro, meathead type of mentality, but it is true that CrossFitters value those that are proficient at their craft. CrossFitters value performance and are generally inclined to listen to those that perform well. For instance, at a social event with some CrossFitters, we were talking about Bible studies, and a friend of mine said, quote, "The only Bible study that I've ever finished was written by Rich Froning," end quote. So, 4-time CrossFit Games athlete and fittest man in history, Rich Froning is the person that he respects the most and is the one that he is willing to listen to the most in regards to spiritual matters like the Bible. And so being proficient at CrossFit is an open door that we gain influence and the ability to speak into people's lives. Then there's also make the gospel tangible. CrossFitters they live off measurable results and practical things. They want to see PRs, they want to see times, and so they want to see a gospel with arms and legs. They want to see a gospel that is doing something. And so CrossFitters love getting out and doing. So if you make the gospel real to them, if you give them an opportunity to love the least of these by doing something, they are going to respond to that much more than they are going to respond to sitting and absorbing a bunch of information. And then finally, the last point is to love them genuinely. I've ran into a lot of CrossFitters over my 3 or 4 years of participating in CrossFit and coaching CrossFit. And it's been my experience that a lot of CrossFitters don't fit very squarely in most traditional church settings. And a lot of them have felt judged or shunned by the church. And so they have left those traditional structures and have instead moved into a place where they feel a sense of belonging, like CrossFit. And so if you genuinely show interest in what they're interested and display grace and share with them your own practical walk with God, they're going to be open to it. CrossFitters are generally pretty open-minded. They experience torture on nearly a daily basis, and they are going to be receptive to things that push them outside of their comfort zone generally. However, they are not impressed by pretension at all. Again, CrossFitters are impressed by performance. It's not about what you say you can do, it's about what you actually do. So, love them genuinely and take a genuine interest in what they're doing. And I think if we do these things, we can see people that are active, people that are hungry for life. I think that we can see them really respond well to the story of God's healing and overcoming of the ultimate enemies of death and destruction.